For this upcoming lesson, we're going to be going back and taking a quick review of material that you should have learned in Algebra 1 involving solving inequalities and also absolute value equations. Now, solving inequalities, we are basically going to be extending what we discussed in solving equations in the previous lesson. So really, this should not be too much more than what you've done already. There's a couple of high points I want to hit out, and so these videos should kind of go a little quickly, and I'll take you through some sample problems here. But I want to point you out, first of all, to this key concept graphic with the basic inequality statements. And what you'll see are the graphs. And I want to remind you that we're no longer going to use the open and closed disk, but we're going to use brackets in place of those disks, similar to the interval notation that we've been working on. So it's very important that you keep that in mind whenever you're graphing these inequalities on a number line. So if we move down just briefly here and touch on a point, one of the things that's different with inequalities than regular equations is when we multiply or divide by a negative number. If you recall from Algebra 1, this is actually going to reverse the sign, and so you want to make sure that when you do this that you don't forget to reverse that sign. That can affect your total solution set. So let's take a look at sample problem number 1. Now, I didn't give you an example in this, figuring that solving equations was probably a good review. We're just adding in an inequality here, and you can use the previous graphic to help you with the graphing. So go ahead and pause the video and work sample problem number 1, and then come back and look at the solution. Okay, so if we work this as a basic equation, I'll start with my original inequality, and if I'm working this like an equation, I'm going to have all the same properties of equality that I used before, except with an inequality sign. So I'm going to start by adding 9 to both sides. And then, of course, you can see here, and I'll just put this in for effect, we're actually dividing both sides by -3. So that gives me a good visual. And so that's going to leave me x. And then, of course, because I divided by a negative, that's actually going to change the direction of the sign. So I'm going to have x is greater than -3. Now, you can just sketch a graph. I'm not looking for precision here or a bunch of little marks on this. So the way I just basically sketch this is I will actually put in the numbers that we're working with, and you can see here that all of the x values are going to be greater than -3, and it's not equal to -3, so that's going to be a open bracket, and I'm just going to use a little highlight tool to show shading. I know that's not the best way to do the shading, but you get a sense of where the solution set is. And now this number line actually gives me a good lead-in into my interval notation to write the solution set. So I'm going to use open brackets with -3, and then we're we're never equal to infinity, so that also has an open bracket. Okay, so that's the first sample. Hopefully you did that fairly well. We've added one more here, a word problem in sample problem number 2. So for sample problem number 2, you need to create your own inequality. So that's probably the challenge here. So let's take a moment to try to work that problem and then come back and take a look at the solution. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is define my variable. So I'm just going to say n is equal to the number of movies that we would rent. And I have two different plans, and so my first plan is just a direct $36 fee. And my second plan actually has the option of a $15 a month fee plus $1.50 for each movie rental that I have, and so that's my n value. Now, I've set up two separate expressions to represent the two individual plans, and so finally it asks me how much must I rent for my first plan to cost less than the second plan? And so I'm going to take a look at setting up an inequality like that. So my first plan here is $36 and I want it to be less than the second plan. And now I just go about solving the inequality for n, and so I'll work through that now. So basically what this is telling us is that we need to rent more than 14 movies to make the first plan worthwhile. So, okay, that's a quick introduction to inequalities, and we'll come back in the next video and we'll discuss the compound inequalities.